Hello, my name's Peter Smith, and a few weeks ago we filmed a video with my friend Fred, the renowned economist, who's predicted the last two recessions very well in his books. And he's predicted the next recession, which he says will be far, far worse next year. Now, this video went viral. We've had way over 500,000 views. It's been clipped and blogged and put on TikTok. It's gone everywhere. A lot of people wanting to know more or criticizing what Fred was saying. Now, we thought we'd make another video that will actually answer the questions of the people, of the thousands of people who commented on the video and people who've blogged about it and wondered what it is Fred was trying to say. So we're going to ask Fred those questions. Hi, Fred.
Hello, Peter.
So what did you think about how many people viewed your amazing little video, which was just us having a chat?
I was astonished, but it shows that people are genuinely concerned. They are intuitively aware that something fundamental is going wrong with our system, and therefore they're on the lookout for explanations.
So I went through all of the questions, the comments of various people, and I've put them into little blocks together. So I think the first one is actually questioning the prediction itself. So it's, a few people said, the broken clock's right twice a day and all that kind of stuff. So somebody called Brett Carter, 6189, he said, I've been hearing people say collapse is coming next year for so many years, I've lost track. They give compelling arguments, but it always ends up not happening. I'm sure it's coming, but saying next year has started to become white noise to me. I've started to just tune out for the most part. I don't think anyone has any idea what's going to come on. And another one from 910 Dawkins, always someone predicting a recession tomorrow. Hundreds of predictions constantly. A broken clock is right twice a day. And then we've got a great one here. Fred is awesome. He's correctly predicted the last 13 global collapses in the last decade. So there you go. People don't understand what you've been seeing in your works that correctly predict the last two recessions and why. And you haven't made any other predictions. It's all this idea that you've made countless predictions is just not true. You've written about two economic recessions, which were correctly pronounced to be at the time they were, back in 1992 and 2008 to 10, when those economic collapses happened. So why are you right?
Well, to start with, people are right to be skeptical about economists making predictions. The reality is that economics as a discipline is in a mess, and therefore it warrants cynicism. The problem is that if people irresponsibly throw the accusation at people like me that we don't know what we're talking about, that ends up not being helpful. As you quite rightly say, Peter, I've made very specific forecasts. I've published them. They are in the public domain, and it's not every year. So, for example, in the first prediction, it was published in 1983 in a book called The Power in the Land. It's available still on the Shepherd Walwyn website. In this, I said that if history continues to work as it has been doing for most of the time, then the business cycle lasts for 18 years. And in 1983, I proposed that the next end of the cycle would be 1992. Not next year, not 1995, but 1992. And I was correct. So the next forecast was after that cycle had ended, I realized that if you just add 18 years to 1992, the end of the cycle would be 2010. So in 1997, I published that forecast in a book called The Chaos Makers. Very specific. The house prices would peak 10 years in the future in 2007. House prices in the UK peaked in the final quarter of 2007. So this was not me making annual predictions, one of which was bound to come true. And in 2005, economists were saying, oh, there's going to be a soft landing now in 2005, and then all will be well into the future. So I published a book called Boom Bust. Now this book said, no, there's not going to be a soft landing now. We're going to continue on till 2007. Prices will peak, and then we will have a terrible downturn, a global, not recession, but depression. And the 10-year austerity that followed 2008 was a depression, however you look at it. Now, people who say, oh yeah, but economists making these predictions every year, so they're bound to be right eventually, that's all very well. It's a fair criticism. But unless those people inform themselves correctly so that they don't level that accusation at people like me, they're going to reinforce the present way of viewing the world that the economists promote, which then in turn is absorbed by governments. So yes, be cynical, but get informed. Buy some books and do a bit of research so that you know why I make these very specific predictions. And so when we come to the present time, it wasn't magic that enabled me to add 18 to 2010 to say that the end of the cycle, the new cycle, would be 2028 with house prices peaking in 2026. Everything suggests that I'm going to be correct. Read up the literature and then offer your comments.
So Fred, what you're seeing is all the predictions you've made easily available from the publisher Shepherd Waldron, who've got a number of publications on this, not just your books, but there's a whole range of people who understand these issues, of which you're the most prolific writer and foremost writer on these matters. So the link will be down in the comments below, so make sure you click on that link. Fred, so some of the other questions we're looking at. Now, I was really interested by this comment from Senec Dezoiza 3759. And I'm going to read it out because it's a really good comment. With all due respect to Fred, as an experienced economist, I'd say there'll be no recession in 2026. He says his prediction of a recession is based on looking at the previous 100 years of past economic cycles. But the situation today is completely different and irrelevant, where America and Europe are no longer dominant in the world economy. Now China is ruling the world economy. Production, trade, consumption is all based on its own economic system and vision, speeding up with cheaper costs, creating a variety of choices for global consumers. So are the contributions in India, Indonesia, Brazil, Russia, and a host of other countries. Reliance on America and the EU by other countries is in the past. It is not significant. So he's basically saying we might have a recession, but not the rest of the world. What's your thoughts?
Well, I don't share the optimism that's embedded in that answer. Look at China. It had its disastrous property boom bust which ended a couple of years ago. And it's now pushing the consequences of that property boom bust onto the rest of the world. And it's very fortunate because that saved it from a serious slump. What it's doing is cutting the costs of its exports and selling into the foreign markets. The foreign markets are in a state where they can't resist China, so they're buying all these increased exports, which is saving China from going into its property slump, which began 2 or so years ago. We are now an integrated global economy. It's true that the West is no longer enjoying the priority that it had since World War II. But although it is weaker in terms of the global distribution of power in the economy, it is still an integral part of it. Look at the chaos being created by the American administration under Trump. It is affecting the rest of the world. If it's correct that the housing market, or more precisely, the land and the rent markets, is a global phenomenon, which I have repeatedly argued in my books, then the cycle is a global cycle. And I'm not relying just on the supreme power of the West as it was after World War II. I'm saying it is a global phenomenon. Yes, there are going to be exceptions to the downturns. In the last end of cycle, for example, Australia didn't suffer the downturn in 2008, 9, 10 because the demand from China for its natural resources was so huge that it carried Australia over the property cycle, and it avoided the consequences of its downturn in the property market. So I'm afraid the comment that you've read out is an illusion, thinking that somehow we are in a unique phase in terms of the business cycle. We're not. Yes, there are confusing events happening, Ukraine, Gaza, whatever you want to point to, but short of a world war, the underlying trend will persist. America has started to suffer some serious regional downturns in the property market, and that can only get worse, and it will be accelerated by the Trump administration. The UK is in the point where the market is indicating, yes, there is still some life in it. It will continue into next year, but it cannot sustain itself. So I'm afraid to point to the differences between now and what happened 50 years ago is not a effective answer against the analysis that I'm offering.
So we're all connected. If the money that's produced goes down to buy property, to pay rents, everything's connected. It'll all go down together across the globe.
Yes, correct.
Okay, Fred, a number of the comments were asking for real solutions people could understand, get behind. And of course, in that video, it was a short video. We didn't talk about the body of your work, where you do point out the quite simple but real solutions that can be implemented to avert these economic crises. So, Shytot3372 said, "Oh dear, a full sort of well-trodden platitudes about how awful it's all going to be, followed by a poor appreciation of the impact of AGI. We'll come back to that a little later. I look forward to a manifesto of what we should all do and resolve this global mess. There wasn't one. Not a scintilla of a coherent idea in the whole episode. A clickbait title was effective." Right, and then we've got another one. Universal Art Radio 6944 said, offers no solutions, just like politicians. Old Marxist is my pick. So that's a wonderful way of saying, but you've got your website, you've got your books, they all have your manifesto in there.
Yes. But here's the point, Peter. The solution has been a matter of public record for more than 200 years. Adam Smith has the solution. You don't have to read my book. Go to The Wealth of Nations. Throughout the 19th century, other thinkers presented the solution to the property market boom-busts, which caused poverty and economic chaos. You will find those arguments rehearsed in my book. They entail the restoration of economic justice. We need to refine the way governments raise the funds to pay for public services. At the moment, and for the last effectively 300 years in Britain, we have penalised people who work for the revenue that we call wages and the profits from the investments in value-adding industries. We penalise them by taxing their labour and their ingenuity. At the same time, we've transferred a stream of value, what economists call economic rent, which we all helped to create. They've transferred that stream of revenue into the private sector for a privileged few. And that's the problem. That's the nub of the problem. And it's not my solution that we need to rebalance the way income is distributed. As I say, Henry George in the 19th century, Adam Smith in the 18th century, and others have been saying precisely that. So there's no secret about the remedy. I am going to be developing that thesis, however, in a book to be published next year, because we are now in a globalized world. And so we have to view the concept of the public revenue in a new way. And I will be presenting that formula in the book next year.
Right, Fred. We've had some really interesting ones, and it's one of those questions I don't know the answer of. And I know politicians. You know me, Fred. I was an ecologist. I get behind lots of legal changes, and I talk to politicians, even government ministers occasionally. And I don't know if it's incompetence or design. Are they oafs or are they Machiavellian players? You know, working for secret people, the rent seekers and all this kind of stuff. What's the answer? So the couple of the questions really said, Morris Wheatley 985 said, stop calling the majority of politicians stupid. They're evil. And Renegade 285, none of this is through incompetence. It's all coldly calculated for an end goal. It's by design. And then we've had a host of other commenters basically saying the same thing. They're evil, they're not stupid. So what's your view?
Well, in my view, the majority of politicians are not evil. They are sincere people wanting to do what they can on behalf of their constituents. They are genuine. They just are not informed about how to deliver the results that their constituents need, because they've absorbed the current way of thinking from the previous generation. The previous generation of politicians made promises. We will solve poverty. We will make sure the housing market works well. We will cut taxes. And they all failed to do this because they don't have the right policy. The next generation of politicians say, look, if you elect us, we will achieve what you want. House prices at affordable prices, full employment and so on. But it turns out that the policies that are available to them, which are embedded in the Whitehall and other civil service institutions, prevents them from thinking outside the box. It's always from within the current set of policies that they try to solve the problems of their constituents. Yes, there are evil individuals. There are some who are corrupt, wanting to serve their personal interests. We only have to look at what's happening in America today to see that in full view. But in my view, most politicians are genuinely wanting to help people, and it's just a tragedy that the intellectual communities from the universities down don't help them to understand the realities. It's the intellectual communities that are basically dishonest. They know that what we've been saying for the last 250 years, since the French physiocrat school, which introduced the idea of a single tax on the rent of land, since then, this policy has been present but suppressed by our intellectual communities because of the vested interests. Today, it's not just the feudal aristocracy that are not wanting to make the change. People like me, homeowners, have a bit of a capital gain on our homes, and we don't want to talk about that capital gain being taxed. So the vested interest pushes the discussion away from the solution onto the anodyne ideas which just do not work. And that's why politics is now so discredited, because politicians make promises which they can't keep.
It does seem over the whole of the Western world that politicians cannot combat growing inequality, growing poverty. I see it everywhere. You know, the people who I work with, they're getting poorer and poorer. They're harder to make ends meet. And it looks like the politicians have just given up. I don't hear anything from Keir Starmer. There's no talk about making things better. All of the northern powerhouses and levelling up. Nobody's talking about it anymore.
Well, but they do make the promise that they will address the issues, like the British Chancellor of the Exchequer says, we are going for growth. But she's not. She's doing the reverse, but she doesn't understand why. And the think tanks that ought to be explaining it to her, and the professors in the universities who should be analysing the policies which are leading to the long run decline in productivity and in wages, and the collapse of the infrastructure in the public sector, are not explaining what's at the root. And that's why governments, no matter how sincere they may be, keep failing.
It's pretty grim out there. You know, I work in the charity sector, Fred. There's redundancies in all the major charities now. Conservation organisations, all the people doing good. There's big redundancies going on right as we speak.
And that is leading us to what I'm saying will be a far worse collapse at the end of this current business cycle, the 18-year cycle, than in the past. We're heading for a new epoch. It's a disaster. But there are plenty of people saying things are really bad, but they're not ending up explaining why. Therefore, they can't say what needs to be done.
Right, Fred, the next question we've got for you, and we've had quite a lot of questions. This was very popular, about your predictions about artificial intelligence. And you know, I'm quite a techie, so I've studied artificial intelligence quite a bit. But there was obviously some knowledgeable people in the comments. So Peter Kane, 6820, he said, luckily, you won't have to worry about AI. We are very far from creating an actual algorithm with human-like reasoning capacity. Large language models appear to reach their limits in terms of capability. Now companies are trying to reduce costs. Otherwise, your financial recession predictions are blood-curdling. But a lot of people did comment about AI, thinking, you know, the Terminators were coming, or that it wasn't that serious. But I don't think that's what you were trying to get through in your comments of AI. I know I've looked at all of the reports of the incredible increases that people in America are facing, and what we could face if we start building these huge data centers. There's been people's electricity bills have been going up 20-30%. They need vast amounts of water to cool. You know, these AI data centers are on a different level of power needs. Some people are saying that it could, in Europe, increase electricity demand by 20% over the next 5 years. So AI in the short term is going to be robbing us of electricity. It's going to be pushing our bills up. But is there anything you want to clarify about your AI predictions?
This is an enormously serious issue. It's the fifth existential crisis that I'm documenting in my book next year. Even the tech guys in Silicon Valley don't understand the significance of what they're doing. All the debate at the moment in America is that the risks are with what they call superintelligence. And they're saying that they haven't invented superintelligence yet. Therefore, AI at the moment is safe. It helps us to cut costs and improve lives in a variety of ways. Well, there is a fundamental flaw even with that optimistic view. Yes, AI today will help us in our businesses to cut costs. We cut costs, which means we cut out labor. That means people have lost jobs. But that's not where it ends. By cutting costs, we increase the rents, the net income that's left after the costs have been met. So if there is something peculiar about the stream of rental income, it's not just about housing. It's also about the rents that are generated in the digital sphere. What we pay or should be paying for using the medium through which we communicate via the internet generates rents. And those rents are added to the location rents of housing, the rents of fossil fuels, and are converging in one big bang. So, yes, things are not that serious, it seems, at the moment, but the industry itself is saying, wait till we invent superintelligence, and that's when we should really be worried. Well, no, I don't agree. Right now, what we are doing is making the algorithms operate by transferring our data, the human behavior, into the algorithms. Well, what is it that we're transferring? It's not just the capacity to make tea or build buildings with putting bricks together by using humanoids to do those jobs instead of human beings. We are transferring knowledge about how to win a war in Gaza, how to send rockets into Ukraine, to destroy buildings where women and children are sleeping at night. That's the information we are also transferring into the algorithms now. And as these algorithms become increasingly sophisticated, to the point where they become autonomous. They don't have to reach the point of what is called super intelligence, more intelligent than humans. They just have to be as intelligent as humans, and then to operate on an autonomous basis, which they can do without super intelligence. And once the metaverse starts to operate independent of the people who created that metaverse, then we hit the real trouble. And that's when the energy issue comes on stream. There will be a point where they will say, look, we need the energy that people are using in winter to keep warm. We need, the humanoids in the metaverse need that energy. We're going to switch off the energy that's going into the homes in the winter because we consume so much energy, and there is only a limited amount of that energy being produced to run our data centers. So to hell with the humans who need warmth or need kettles going in the kitchen. We need that energy. That's when the autonomous sphere kicks in its awareness that on the precious issue of energy, if it's a choice between humans enjoying that energy or the humanoids enjoying the energy, the humanoids are going to say, to hell with the humans. And that's when we really begin to realize that the game is up. And that's even before superintelligence is invented.
So let me just paraphrase what is probably, I mean, I've not heard people talking about your argument that increases in productivity because of artificial intelligence is just going to make people's lives more miserable because they have to pay a greater proportion of their income in rents for housing or to get monopoly businesses, all the various forms of monopoly rent. And it's just going to make them poorer. And then they're going to get double whammied because the data centers are going to just keep on wanting more energy for what they get on with.
Correct.
And eventually we'll just be superfluous. It's not that the Terminator is going to come in with his laser guns. It's just we're going to be, the economics of it are going to destroy the poor of the world.
Humans will become redundant. And then the people on the lowest incomes will suffer first, and they will literally start to disappear. Families can't procreate, so the populations will start to diminish, and it will have a disastrous effect. And it's not something in the future based on inventing super intelligence. The process has begun.
So it's just to understand economics from the classical sense of economics, the John Stuart Mill, the Adam Smith, the David Ricardo, the Henry George, just to understand that. It's amazing how many economists I meet who've never actually properly read those books, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's always telling. And they don't understand the whole point of economic rent, and they don't get it. It's as simple as that.
And you see, this comes out when they say there is no silver bullet. What I'm saying is that, yes, we do have one simple, single solution, which is to rebalance the public finances. And by doing that, we solve many, many problems. But that's a silver bullet. But the people in academia say there is no silver bullet solution to our problems. And that's because they haven't thought deeply enough about the functions of rent.
So, Fred, now the near final question. A lot of people throughout this, throughout the comments and what other people have talked about of your viral video, who were genuinely fearful of what the future holds. They weren't economists. They weren't people who had a vested interests in certain type of politics or investing in gold or Bitcoin or whatever. But they asked honest questions. So Maria Jose Figueredo 2431 said, "Do you have any advice for the common rank and file?" And we had exactly the same question from many, many others. What should people do in preparation?
Things are going to be bad because, as things are at present, with a general lack of understanding of the cause of the catastrophe that we're heading towards, there will be general despair. Despair results in violence, or at the very least, people turn for salvation to the right-wing populist politicians. And that is where we are today. And there's almost nothing that can be done if we remain ignorant of the solution. What can people do? They can transform the psychology, the social psychology, by understanding the cause of our collective problems, which is a single problem, and then engaging in the conversation with others on a large scale. And we have the means to do that through social media. Social media can be a tool for good as well as bad. But it means we need to be informed about precisely why we're heading for a disaster. If enough people say, well, we now understand how we got into this mess and we know what needs to be done, even though things will be going on around us that are really serious, like whole communities being burnt down in Spain, like whole communities along the Florida or the California coast being flooded, even though that will be happening, there needn't be a general panic, fear, if people understand the cause and the cure, which means that they would have hope of navigating through what's going to happen. But that means people en masse must be aware of what needs to be done. Now, it's no good the cynic saying, that's an impossible scenario, we can't achieve it. In Britain 100 years ago, there was this mass awareness of what needs to be done, and it led Parliament to actually introduce the tax reforms that were needed. But that lasted for 10 years, and then the right-wingers, the Conservatives, moved in and they scrapped the legislation and they restored the old way of penalising people who went to work and rewarding people who sat back and just collected the rents. But in that time in Britain, it actually worked. There was a general understanding. But of course, today, unlike then, we all own a bit of land, and we all, therefore, through our homes, receive these capital gains, whereas back then, most people were tenants. So it didn't worry them if the capital gains were diminished and wage rates levels were raised by untaxing wages. But it can be done, but it needs people to be informed. That's the key thing. Otherwise, no, I'm not going to tell people they should sell their homes or they should move and all the rest of it. It's for individuals to work out, based on their particular circumstances, how to cope. Nobody's going to be exempt. Everybody in the world will be affected this next time. But given that we're all in it together, we can all get through it together. But we will only do that if we know what the hell is happening and how to build back better once we navigate the catastrophes.
So, Fred, what you're saying is the only real way we're going to protect ourselves and our children is if we learn that we need to start taxing economic rents and take the taxes off our trade, labour and investments.
And that would instantly have a constructive effect on the levels of employment, on the volumes of resources going into the infrastructure, and in other words, the reverse of what's happening now. People are losing jobs, governments are not spending money on defences against climate change, and we're actually accelerating the rate at which we're heading for disaster. Whereas if we do the right thing in terms of tax policy, we reverse everything and we start rebuilding immediately.
So the only empowerment is our own knowledge and how we talk to other people and how we play our own tiny role in society.
And that's called informed democracy.
Well, that's wonderful. I can't thank you enough, Fred, for sharing your thoughts with all our viewers. And hopefully we'll do some more interesting videos in the run-up to your publication of your next book.
Thank you, Peter.